and all the worship team members for this beautiful service this morning on Super Bowl Sunday, and one that we have declared as our Social Justice Sermon Award Sunday. Every year in Unitarian Universalism, there's an award for the Skinner Sermon, which honors Clarence Skinner. He was a dean at Tufts College School of Religion and taught liberal religion and applied Christianity. And every year we have a panel that accepts sermons that are submitted for this award. Well, last year in 2020, I was asked and honored to serve on that committee that selected one sermon that rose above all the others of about 10 that were submitted. And the sermon that I'm preaching today, Humanitarian Aid is Never a Crime, was the awarded sermon. It was preached by my colleague, the Reverend Bethany Russell-Lowe, who just serves a state over in Arizona at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Tucson. So I want to just share with you this beautiful sermon. When I read it and scored it, I said, I definitely need to preach this sermon here in Las Cruces. And lo and behold, other panelists were also enamored and impressed with this sermon. Before I start, I just want to say something a little funny. I enjoyed that time for all ages, but I need to stand up for, I guess, the voice of Caterpillar fathers who didn't get a credit on the order of service, nor did the Buddha in the past times for all ages. So I'm going to have a conversation with our DRE and the RE committee to make sure that our father figures are being recognized in the time for all ages. Well, humanitarian aid is never a crime. A courtroom in Arizona was filled to the brim for 2 weeks, 2 Junes ago, and then again that November. It was filled with humanitarian aid workers, desert dwellers, clergy, press, and law students. Dr. Scott Warren, a humanitarian aid volunteer and teacher of geography, was on trial for providing and holding space for life-saving humanitarian aid in the Sonoran Desert. When I say life-saving, I mean that literally. Over 2,500 human remains have been found in the Sonoran Desert since 2000. Thousands more have not been discovered. No More Deaths, which is associated with the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Tucson, alongside other humanitarian aid groups, provides life-saving humanitarian aid in the desert. The prosecution of this activity by our government brought UUs to court twice this year. Once this spring, which ended in a hung jury, and then again in November when our government decided to retry Dr. Warren. Dr. Warren's initial arrest in January 2018 came the evening after No More Deaths released a report of abuse of humanitarian aid workers and work by Border Patrol. This arrest of Dr. Warren, we believe, was retaliation for revealing these truths. So we went to court, all of us, collectively. We spent hundreds of hours in court, listening as kindness was ripped to shreds, listening as the impulse to compassion was openly questioned. We sat in silence on hard benches, taking in the deception and the lies, the arguments and the counter arguments. We listened to all the pain. We took breaks when it was too much for us. Others listened when we couldn't anymore. We sent some out to drop water in the desert. We asked one another to care for themselves. We listened for the truth We amplified the truth. We did not let our hearts break. We let our hearts break open. So when the hour came, right after the flurries of texts and emails about a verdict, as we power walked back to the courthouse, we could feel hope begin to fill in the places where our hearts had broken open to the pains of the trial. Hope began to fill in the cracks, began to stitch up the gaps too big to fill. We rushed back to the courthouse just a few hours after closing arguments. I was filled with hope because I've been in church my whole life. I know that a group of 12 strangers, in this case, a jury, a group of 12 strangers does not come to a big decision unanimously in 2 short hours. Not unless they are choosing to side with love. In the courtroom, we held our breaths together. And as the judge read the verdict, not guilty, we gasped. The gasp that comes before shouting for joy. And then again, not guilty, another gasp. And the press ran out of the courtroom. And then the courtroom attendant went one by one and asked each juror, is this your personal opinion? And is this the opinion of the jury? It was like a litany of affirmations that humanitarian aid is not a crime. In that moment, our hearts, which had just that morning broken open to the pains of corruption, aggression, and xenophobia, were welded back together by joy. It was because we let our hearts break open, not break into pieces, that we were able to have such joy that afternoon, that we were able to laugh and sing and feel the fullness of joy in that moment. As we gathered, some jury members of the Latinx descent came and joined us. They said the work that No More Deaths and so many others do is fabulous. Reverend Mary Catherine Morin, President and CEO of the UU Service Committee, wrote in an op-ed in the Arizona Star that week, and I quote, "It may not be possible to prevent all those deaths, but it's well within our power to reduce them. Warren and the other volunteers with No More Deaths believe it is not only possible, it is what must be done." Unquote. Humanitarian aid is never a crime. Kindness won. Love wins in the end. And the day after the trial, Raíces paid out $2.1 million to bond out 200 immigrants from the deadliest detention centers in the United States. More joy to propel us forward into a world where we know there is more suffering ahead. The English poet William Blake once wrote, "Joy and woe are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silk entwined." And Pueblo author Martin Prechtel wrote, "Grief expressed out loud for someone we have lost, or a country or a home we have lost, is in itself the greatest praise we could give them. Grief is praise because it is the natural way love honors what it misses. Joy and sorrow, grief and praise are all connected, inseparable, 2 sides of one coin. We cannot experience the fullness of one without the depth of the other. We need to feel it all in order to feel the fullness of any of it. UU theologian and professor Reverend Dr. Rebecca Ann Parker once wrote, "Evil's accomplice is anesthetization." Anesthetization means not feeling. So to not feel is to allow space for evil to enter our bodies and actions. To feel is to resist the temptation to go against love. To feel is to discern where love resides and against love. To feel is to resist the temptation to go against love. To feel is to discern where love resides and where we find ourselves. And what I hear from people I serve every day, and what I'm sure Rev hears from many of you, is an overload of feelings. How can we feel it all? Feeling everything is impossible. Take it from this empath, learning how to set limits on how long I hold on to feelings I pick up from others. We can't feel it all. We shouldn't try, but we should always make sure that we are still capable of feeling. Evil's accomplice is anesthetization. In order to feel so much pain and to still be able to feel the joys, we must learn to let our hearts break open without breaking to pieces. We must break our hearts open to the pain and the joy, to the grief and the praise. A heart broken into pieces by grief cannot fully feel joy. A heart broken open is ready to receive whatever may come. On that Wednesday afternoon in November, as we gathered outside the courthouse, it was because we had let our hearts break open to the pain that we were able to feel the full joy of that not guilty moment. Both the pain and the looming trial for 22 months, as well as the pain of living in a militarized borderlands where migrants have been led to the deaths for decades. Our broken open hearts was what allowed the fullness of that joy to reside in us. It is what carried that joy into the next day, and the next week, and the next month, and the next year. It was feeling the fullness of that moment that allowed us to imagine where we go with all this joy. Back to the desert, back to the long hikes with heavy gallons of water, back to the side of love, wherever love is. Because just that day, it was announced that the Tucson sector would begin implementing a Remain in Mexico program intended to discourage and disempower people seeking asylum. We must let our hearts break open to all this pain. Break open, not apart. Those of us who were listening heard another important announcement that November afternoon in the courtroom. Judge Rainer Collins ruled that it was Dr. Scott Warren's sincerely held religious beliefs which compelled him to leave water in the desert, something our government felt falls into the category of abandoned property. The judge ruled that while Dr. Warren admitted to this action, his action was permissible under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, or RFRA. RFRA is the same law which allows some bakers not to make wedding cakes for same-gender loving couples. RFRA is usually upheld to keep a person's freedom to discriminate or not do something. In this case, RFRA was upheld to allow a person to show more dignity than our government and laws enable. In this case, liberal religious values which promote the dignity of all people were upheld. This was the first time in many years that an RFRA claim was upheld by a federal judge. What is incredibly distinctive for me is that Dr. Warren is not affiliated with a formal religious institution, not even Unitarian Universalism. Dr. Warren has held deeply held values which guide his work, and Judge Collins ruled in his favor of the RFRA claim because, as he said in his judgment, I take him at his word. We have an opportunity now to reflect on what our own values call us to do. What does our faith compel us to do? Whether or not we agreed with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, what does this time we are living in call us as people of faith to do? What freedom do we have to create the world we dream about? What does our faith compel us to do in this moment? When this trial was going on in Arizona, I urged friends and family around the country to consider the implications of a guilty verdict in Arizona. Because Dr. Warren was on trial for what our government calls harboring, which was actually showing two immigrants a place to sleep, food, water, and basic medical care, our government was attempting to criminalize kindness. If that guilty verdict came down, could you offer your neighbor a glass of water? Or would that be harboring? Could you let your child's friend sleep over? Or would you need to ask for their papers first? Or risk being prosecuted for harboring? Where is the line when it comes to showing kindness to other humans? Judy Chicago's "and then" does not flow from a static idea of support, but from an active alignment of our values and actions. We, as religious people, have an opportunity to imagine in this very moment the future we want to create. We do not yet know what was made possible in that courtroom that November. We have yet to fully realize how our faith will compel us to transform our world. I take him at his word, Judge Rainer Collins said in this week. What would you do with your sincerely held religious beliefs if there were a future promised of a judge taking you at your word? What future becomes more possible when you align your actions with your faith? What is the world you dream about, and how can you continue to build it now? Wherever you go, friends, go with your hearts broken open. Feel the pain and the grief of these times so that when the time comes for celebration and joy, you are ready to receive those feelings too. A broken heart needs medical attention. A heart broken open is within the bounds of community to heal. Figure out where love needs you to be. Take your beliefs there and act for more justice. I will take you at your word, and I will ask that your sincerely held religious beliefs take you further than they have before. Amen, Ashe, and may it be so.